Mamas, I'm so glad you're here. You get to listen to Bonnie Landry from Make Joy Normal. She is a homeschool mom for the last 30 years of 7 children. She has her own podcast, Make Joy Normal, and a special shout out to her podcast co-host, Elizabeth, who just had her first baby, Emma. So congratulations and welcome to the family and welcome to the world, Emma. So let's see if we can bring Bonnie into the discussion because she has a lot to share with us today about planning for our upcoming homeschool. Well, hello there.
Hi. Okay, let's try this again.
Let's do it again. We can
oh my gosh, sorry about that.
No, don't be. Been there, done that 1,000,000 times. Or as you said in your workshop, 1 bajillion times, I think.
Yeah, 1 bajillion times.
You have so much to share. This is such a meaty workshop. There's so many different directions that we could go into a discussion. But first, I want to say a special congratulations to you on your 7th grandchild.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Yeah. Yep. They're rolling in.
They are rolling in. Got 7 kids, 7 grandkids, and incredible things to share with the homeschool mom community. Would you jump in and tell me what it was the origins of your workshop in the first place?
Absolutely. For about the last 20 years, I've been doing a workshop called Homeschooling with Joy, and it's a full-day workshop where I walk parents through what our day actually looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does the sit-down component one-on-one time look like? What does the family learning look like? What does the housework look like?
Mm-hmm.
So that people have a really comprehensive view of how you can homeschool in a really natural, organic way, but still with some directed learning. Not everybody's comfortable with the idea of unschooling.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we find that balance without worrying too much about checking boxes and all of that stuff? So the workshop grew to the point where I couldn't offer it as many times as I was being asked to do it. So I decided to video. I hired somebody to do a video job. She did beautiful work and made this 4-part series called Homeschooling with Joy, which I sold for a few years. And at the beginning of COVID, made it for free so that people that were in need could access it, right? And I just recently put it up on the podcast. So I've just released episode 3, apparently.
Yes, you did.
And the 4th one will be out tomorrow. So, or Wednesday. So, yeah, so it's been great. And it's been incredibly popular on the podcast. I was really excited about that because, of course, this is a whole new audience than I had 5 years ago. So.
It is a power-packed workshop. There are so many different things. And when I listen to it, I think, I don't know how you call yourself, or if you even care to identify with a particular philosophy, but the way that you homeschool is very, very similar to how I homeschool.
Right.
So I never want to fully ascribe to unschooling because I know that there's some things that I want to share with my kids. And yet at the same time, I know that it really works to harness their interest and that's how you can really get kids to learn stuff.
I've had people call kinds of things over the years, like, oh, you're so Charlotte Mason, or oh, I had somebody describe me as Cersei meets Charlotte Mason. I don't know, just, do my own thing out there. But there was not any particular philosophy I ascribed to except first, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't really think we need to. In fact, when we start to be purists, I think we lose sight of the reality of the child in front of us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And not just the child in front of us, but I actually think us as parents, we have a history with our own concept of what we think is important for an education.
Yeah.
And how we learn and how we engage. And when we look at our personality types, how we engage people, and all of that plays into creating a very unique, individualized home education.
Yeah.
We should just go with what we are instead of trying to do something.
So I feel like my mission is to really help parents to find out what they want. And it's been interesting because people there's an inclination to want to curriculum-ize what.
Yes.
And it's something I just keep sidestepping because I don't know where to go. A support network to put the confidence, power, the desire into parents' hands to really look at the individual. It's important. And we all start off that way.
Right.
Imagine that. But we get bogged down, comparing and, looking at the program in front of us and trying to make a program.
I think sometimes we have these ideas of what homeschool should look like. We get
Mm-hmm.
excited by it and we kind of follow that until we get to, you say, make joy normal, but we get to the place where we're like making gritting your teeth homeschool normal.
Yeah.
And that is not fun. No, we don't want to be there. I mean, we all do kind of go there at times, but then we have to check ourselves and say, okay, where do we want to be? So tell me about the origins of Make Joy Normal. Where did that come from?
So a few years ago, we were actually at camp. I do a homeschool camp every year, organize that. And we were at camp one year, and I don't know what was going on, but there was some sort of conflict going on in the camp. And at some point, I just said, could everybody just be normal? And kind of where the expression came from, I started using that on my blog, be normal, right? And then when I was thinking of a name for the podcast, Make Joy Normal was just something that I don't know, it sounded funny, and I thought that's what I'm trying to do, right? That joy should be our default, normal, but really stress is a lot of the time stress is our angst and frustration and all of that's our default. How can we do that, right?
So can you make your homeschool joyful every day?
Yeah, I don't think every minute of your homeschooling is joyful. Or I really dislike to point it at homeschooling because parenting isn't always joyful, and so it's really the relationship stuff that is hard to keep joyful all the time. So it's not really education that is the problem, right? It's our attitude towards relationships, right? And so, of course, nothing's going to be joyful every minute, but if your overall goals and ideals are joyful, you're much more likely to attain that. And if you spend time reflecting on yourself and deciding, okay, why am I in it all the time? What's that all about, and what can I do about it? Right? My default should be calm, joy, gratitude. That should be our default. We have to train ourselves to get there. So, we can handle a lot of crises gracefully, graciously. That it might be normal to not have any kind of crises gracious, right? And of course you have times when you're tired where a crises on one might not bother on a different day when you're tired, stressed about something else, might weigh a lot more. So was it glowing happiness all the time? Of course not. But I would say the overall vibe of life was joyful.
Yeah. It's interesting because I chose my website in Capturing the Charm Life, I don't know, 13 years ago or something. And gradually when I started to move out towards not just writing about me and my homeschool, but also sharing it with others and how I can use it to help them, then I realized I don't know if I want to tell them to capture the charmed life because there's no perfect charmed life out there. But having said that, just like you focus towards joy, we have to have a focus. We have to have a vision for our homeschool. We have an absolute gravitational pull to wanting it to be charmed and joyful. So then always checking ourselves and saying, okay, how can we shift the challenge that we have right now to move towards that? And I think that's part of creating that vision for our homeschools. And we need to do that because we need to hit somewhere, at least attempt to move things towards that direction. Because there's always so many things we can do that actually move it away from that direction. And like sitting with your
endless things, do to move away from that for sure. Yeah.
Especially a lot of the things that you share in this workshop. Instinctively, when I wanted to first sit down with my kids to teach them how to read, it was like, okay, we have to do this fast. You have to know how to do this almost like within the week. If I say it, you need to remember it. There was always a sort of intensity about the lesson plan says this, so we have to do that. And the way that you engage it in your workshop is it's the way that it's worked in my homeschool. So I'd love to hear more about your approach of education without coercion.
Right. So when we think about education, about education, and you sort of reflect on what education is, you know, it's the development of a person. Okay, so education never ends. Education never looks exactly the same for one person as it does for another person. So education is the growing of a person. So toilet training your child is part of education. Teaching them how to use a knife and fork is part of education. Learning their times tables is part of education. Learning how to interact with adults is part of their education. Learning calculus is part of their education. You know, like learning how to write an essay is part of education. So everything is just a skill or a skill set, right? Everything we learn. If we didn't have any formation, we would be in this, survival mode all the time, right? Say we didn't have parents, or we didn't have, give me an example of kids who are raised with parents who are absent, right? And they're not teaching them any manners. They don't teach them how to apply for a job. They don't, show them things. A lot of that is very passive teaching, just because you're there, because you're present. But if children were essentially raising themselves, we couldn't expect them to know, say, the rules of society, and know, their times tables, and know appropriate bathroom manners, whatever. You have to be taught those things. And you learn those things in different ways, but primarily from your parents, right? When we entered into homeschool, the most important thing to me was, I didn't want to coerce my children. I didn't want it to be about right? The stars, and you're going to get a reward if. It's really important to me that it was not coercive that way. And I'm talking about rewards and or consequences. Either one can, they're both really a form of coercion, right? There's no rewards. There's also no punishments. It just is what it is. I'm taking you from where you are and I'm moving you forward a little bit every day, right? And that shouldn't require coercion. And so when I started homeschooling, and I realized a couple years in that this was very doable. I could teach my children without them being coerced to anything. Beside them, I'm walking with them, I'm along with them, and they are slowly taking the reins themselves and becoming independent with certain things at times. And there was no coercion involved. What I realized was that discipline would be the same thing, because discipline is just another set of skills, right? Or skill set. And so if that's where I got Gordon Neufeld's, right, which is all about non-coercive discipline. So what is it? It's discipleship. It is leading the way, showing the way, opening the doors, walking beside. It's not trying to force into a child's brain. It's teaching them how to attend, how to be interested, how to love learning, how to do something difficult, all of those things. So that might sound like it's a lot of work, but it's actually a lot of work, because you're not spending any time wrestling the relationship for them to get the schoolwork done, right? Just say, okay, well, maybe they're having, I'm not going to what's the point of getting mad at them if they're having a bad day, right?
I can tell you what the point is, by the way, because I've been there, and usually it has something to do with my anxiety. And I would like them to quell my anxiety and, just show me that they can do this thing. It has nothing to do with them. No. Or maybe I want to go somewhere at 11 o'clock. Maybe that's it. You talk about creating lessons really short and very abbreviated, but also being very present, teaching them to be present. But I loved hearing that you said, and you as the homeschool parent also being present.
Yeah, I think that it's one of the greatest lessons that I learned doing dictation for the first time with my first child. Was that my attending to her for whatever, 3 minutes, 5 minutes at a time, 7 minutes at a time, on her age or the given day or whatever, that my attending to her, not attending to other things, right? Was so golden in terms of how education is out, and pardon me, setting the tone. That I'm just going to say education, or we're going to do our few little little tiny math lesson, and we are just going to have this nice time together. And
Yeah.
it's all about you. Now, sometimes attending, a bunch of kids. I had a bunch of kids, right? So sometimes it means there's a baby on your lap. Sometimes there's an honest emergency. Somebody peed on the floor, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
But it's really important to sort out, what's an actual emergency and how you can prevent emergencies in the middle of trying to attend to a child. That's a skill in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And what's just trying to email or to load the dishwasher. Multitasking is not our friend, right?
No, it isn't. There's a myth around it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mistake to think that this is a good idea, because it just doesn't play out well for anybody on any level.
That
My
idea that you need to be
on
present.
Saturdays addresses this, actually.
Who is it?
My podcast that I put out on Saturday actually addresses
Oh,
this.
really? Yeah.
And it just needs to be said over and over again. Just focus on this thing. Then when this is over, then go to the next, right?
And we're also teaching our kids to do that when they're learning.
Exactly.
That was a concept. I think I heard it through a Charlotte Mason thing
Yeah.
about doing shorter lessons. And of course she does, at least according to the book, I see the kinds of lessons she does, and she does a lot of different lessons. But I'm not saying that you have to do that, but you can use that idea to remember that shorter lessons work better. And I don't remember who said this. There was some conference seminar that I attended, and they said, try 15 minutes of math instead of doing an hour, or assigning a number of pages for a workbook. And of course, you don't have to learn math just through a workbook. But if you are, and just do a short amount of time that seems suitable to your child, not 15 minutes because you or me had said it just now, but it actually fits with your child. And then see if they really can stay with it and put their best work toward it. Because just like you said, and I've heard other people say, getting kids to practice making mistakes in their math and putting out work for the sake of work isn't learning.
No. So much easier there with you, fewer questions, way fewer questions, and be there beside them, guide them through that until you're confident that they don't actually need that anymore, right? And that comes later than you would think about. But if it's only for 10 minutes or however long or 3 questions or however long so value in that sitting, focus. It doesn't mean you have to be telling them what to do. You're just watching, right? And depending on the child, sometimes you're actually intervening, like, okay, what next? Tell me out loud. Or sometimes you're just watching them, and if they're making mistakes, okay, what do you think you did wrong there?
Right.
Right? So that's something that we, in the end, it requires less time from us than to say, okay, you go and sit and do your lesson for however long it takes you, because the frustration just builds so quickly. They do get to that point, but our guided learning is just so much more effective.
Right. You actually had a really clever example of teaching kids with Smarties. I think it was how to add, or maybe it was
chocolate chip.
Yeah, was it chocolate chips? Okay,
yeah.
I think I like Smarties. Can we do peanut M&Ms?
Anything they wanted, but usually it was chocolate chips.
Anything I want? No, probably we should do chocolate chips then. Yeah. So tell me about that. How do you teach kids math with chocolate chips?
So basically, we start out just with manipulatives and just counting, right? So 20 chocolate chips, and I just sort of dump them in front of us, and start counting out. Here's the cool thing is, once you've had your first child, you don't have to teach anybody to count anymore, because they hide and seek together. Just start learning to count. And they count, and so we take turns, like maybe just starting with the odd number, like I do 1, 2, and they do 3, and I do 4, and like we just go back and forth like that. And then we start doing things like, oh, if I get 2 chocolate chips, and I have 2 chocolate chips, how many do we have together? How many is that? So just using them like a little really simple manipulative. Over the next few weeks, I'm actually reading out my book, Chocolate Chip Math, as part of the podcast episode, and also Dictation as part of a podcast episode. So people,
Great.
The idea fleshed out. That would be a good. But and so you can learn all kinds of things. You can learn how to divide, learn how to multiply, learn how to group or pattern chocolate chips, right? If I do a pattern, I go 1 chocolate chip, then 3 chocolate chips, then 1 chocolate chip, then 3 chocolate chips. What comes, right? So we we just play with the chocolate chip, little mathy things, and then, add, subtract, divide, make shapes, make patterns, and then they eat them. It's just that easy.
I think I really like that, because you're really saying, listen, we don't have to make this into a workbook page, or we don't have to stress over a lesson plan around something. We can just like see the maybe, and I'm not meaning just math, but we can see a lesson in whatever we're doing or whatever we're playing with. But also you're very present with them, and also you are not expecting that they figure everything out right away. You're showing them, showing them, showing them, showing them until they finally say, until, yeah, drip, 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 until they finally say to you, hey, Mom, I think I can do that. Can I do it?
Yeah. And I mean, because we're working with them so intimately, we know what they know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it just moves very naturally from that into, a little notebook. But then I'll write something out. Like I'll say, okay, see how I have 3 here and 2 here. We can actually write that up. Number sentence. Right? So 3, and we use this sign. It means plus, and 2. This sign means equal. Right? If they're not ready for symbols, if they're, too young when you introduce them, you'll not just play it over and have no idea what you're talking about. So then, okay, it's not quite time yet. Right? But eventually you can put the symbols and onto paper. Sometimes for some kids, they can figure that out by the time they're 5 or 6. Some kids, it's a little later. We just move them forward a tiny bit. Every time we challenge without frustration.
It's also really interesting to me how you use your book, your dictation book, which I definitely want to hear you actually read it, you said, because the concept around dictation, which, I think when I heard you speak it in the workshop, made me realize, okay, this is a way of engaging kids, and this can be used for any subject.
Any subject. And it is the thing that set me on the path for learning this way, right?
So would you share a little bit about that, how you actually do that?
About how I actually do dictation?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So basically, I don't have kids anymore, but as soon as they wanted to, and again, with the first child, that's an invitation, but with children after that, they generally want to, because they can see this is a really nice time with Mom and to test. It's just cozy time, right?
Yeah.
So let's sit down and do dictation. And I sit right beside them. We have a little notebook in front of us. And they've usually chosen what they want themselves, but sometimes when they're starting out, I choose nursery rhyme they're with. And I say it out loud, and I give them as much help as necessary. Depending on their age, it's going to look quite different, one age to another. Whatever help they need, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So say, for example, we're doing 1, 2, buckle, right? So I'm going to say, okay, here, the first word is 1. If they don't know how to read that, say that's an O and an N and an E, right? Or maybe I just give them one letter at a time. They're even just learning how to make their letter. I might make dots, for the shape of the O. Just trace around this, that, right? And just trace, and maybe they only do 1 or 2 words. If they're just learning how to make letters, learning how to hold a pencil, that's very rudimentary, right? Mm-hmm. As they get a little bit older, same thing, 1, 2, my shoe, I'll say, do you know how to spell the word 1? It's a funny word, because it doesn't really look like how it sounds, and it's one of those tricky words. I would just always call it word. And they might try to take a guess at it, or they might say, yeah, I know it's O-N-E. Okay, so the line is 1, 2. So they write those down with as much help as necessary for it to be correct. And there's a comma after 2, and then buckle 2. Okay, so maybe I only give them 1 word, buckle, and then space, then my shoe. With an older child, I'm going to say, okay, the first line is 1, my shoe. And I'm just going to let them go to it. I'm pretty confident that they're going to be able to do that without my help, right? So I'm sitting beside them. So everything is passively taught, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, this is how you make an O, this is and there's a silent E on the end. I'm just saying it. I'm just monologuing, really. But 1 or 2 things out of the lesson pull out to make a lesson. Now, when they're very young, and if they're not actually reading when you start dictation, those might really be phonics lessons, right? Right. And it makes a nut sound. Can you think of any other words to be an example of an active lesson? And on my side of the page, I'm going to say, okay, can you think of anything that starts with nut? And they might say, nope. Well, that's a good word. I write it down. No, it starts with N. Nice, need, whatever. I'll get them to sort of brainstorm, and I might write down 2 or 3 of the words. Does anyone in our family have an N in their name? We'll talk about it for 10 seconds, or 30 seconds, and I might just pull out one lesson. I pull out one more. Now, there's a little dot at the end here, and that means that the sentence is over, right? And so I put a dot, right? We call that a period. That's it. So you're teaching the entire time. You're teaching. Some of it is passive, right? And so you just don't ever want it to be oppressive to them. But they're learning. I think all learning is actually through the passiveness, right, of it. Even though we're pulling things out, I would say just the passiveness. We do this. Oh yeah, we can realize that. That's called a proper noun. You're just talking through whatever's in front of you. Right. So I could use this passage for a 5-year-old or an 18-year-old. It wouldn't really matter, right?
Yeah, because you're very much dependent on how they're engaging or interacting with what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And people often ask, but what about grades? What about testing? And I know I always say, but you almost always know where they're at with something, unless, of course, they're doing a class online that's independent of you. You don't necessarily know. It's possible some of those courses actually have built-in testing for themselves.
Yeah.
But if you're with them all the time, you do have a sense. So the lesson that you just finished saying, that refers to pretty much any child across the spectrum, depending on where they're at. And the person that will know that is the mother or the parent.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think we have to also be ready for the delight of the child. Say for example, you're sitting with a 6-year-old or 7-year-old and you do 1, 2, 3, you just do that one line.
Yeah.
And then they say, Mom, what does this poem even mean?
Yeah.
Right? I would take that and say, that's a really good question. This is a poem that's been around for a long time. Maybe I even look it up. Okay, do I know the history of the poem or whatever? But it's a poem that helps children learn to count through rhyming because it's easier to remember rhymes and pictures. It creates pictures in your head, so it helps us to rhyme. And so many poems are like that. Let the conversation happen as it's going to happen. So that to me is just such a delight, because what you're doing with dictation, I think this is the crux of dictation. You're looking at language under a microscope. You're looking at the technical aspect, looking at it up close. What sounds? What are the rules? What is the structure? What does a comma mean? All these things. We're looking at all the technical parts of language. But then we're also looking at the telescope. What is the beauty and purpose of language? And we're doing it in 1, 5, 6, 7 lesson, right? It's just so, I love it.
You actually talk about the Socratic Method, and it was funny. My oldest daughter, and I think it was in her first year, she's actually taking philosophy, and she's taking Latin and psychology and all of the social science degree. And she said, Mom, you taught us in the Socratic Method. And I went, yes, I did that on purpose.
Yes, I tell people that if you're not using curriculum, people ask you the question, well, what program do you use? And you feel uncomfortable with that, whatever. Oh, my son joined us. Hi, Abel. He's always wanting to learn how to,
Hello.
I think he's at work right now, so I'm not quite sure why he's
okay. Yeah. That's awesome.
But it's one of those things that we can say, well, we use the Socratic method. It's discussion-based, question-oriented as we search for truth, right? And so, well, if somebody says, well, what do you mean by that? Well, we're looking for the truth of language. We're looking for both the truth in the rules and the structure of language. We're also looking for the truth in the purpose of it. And so our questions, taken to their natural end, we're going to answer all those questions. Just like Socrates did. He looked through dialogue, through questions, through discussion. And that's what we do. And so if you don't feel like you need to say, oh, I'm tired because we're not Charlotte Mason, or we're not, whatever program is out there, I don't even know them anymore. That we just, oh yeah, no, we're a family.
Right.
It's a great way to answer that.
And I think what I learned at a base, what it really means is if a kid asks a question, go towards the question.
Yeah.
It does not mean that you know the
Just dance
answer.
with them. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can find out. And I remember having like this moment around the dinner table early in homeschooling. They were asking questions, lots of questions. They were little. And I remember thinking, I need quiet right now. And then I thought, oh, geez, I'm responsible to help them understand whatever they're asking. So I need to address their questions. And
Yeah.
you can create a very interesting education just based on questions.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
as you said, unit studies you can create out of a book and you use literature as a book. In fact, I loved what you said. Gotta say, I know there is one out of maybe 25 homeschool moms in the last few weeks that said that she doesn't do read alouds with her kids. But you said if you're too busy to read to your kids, you're too busy.
I
Amen.
know, harsh words, but
Yes. Well,
yeah,
no, not really.
I
Not
think it
really.
is something
I'm
that
with you.
we really have to be acknowledged. You know, if your life is that busy, something should change, right? Because that's a hard thing to put your children through, to put yourself through.
There's so much to learn through books. So,
Hmm.
you know, and between you and me and everybody else, I didn't really read until I was 17. I mean, I could read, but I didn't want to read. And
Right.
and when after 17, I mean, I've made up for lost time for sure. I mean, I get through so many books still. I can zoom through books now, but I absolutely love reading books and the
Hmm.
numbers of things that you can do with your kids in just say one book. Everybody always defaults to Charlotte's Web because in discussion because I think everybody knows that story,
Yeah.
but everybody knows that story, and so that story can take you down, you know, a discussion of farm animals, or it can take you down a discussion of writing or printing, like Charlotte did in her
Hmm.
web, or you know, so many different possibilities. You could actually create an entire unit study on that, and you talk
Yeah.
about that in your workshop.
And or friendship,
Yeah.
loyalty. There's just so many potential discussion topics. On in one chapter of Charlotte's Web, you could come up with 50 different discussion topics, right?
Yes.
And again, to be, I mean, we could plan out ahead of time, plan, okay, I want to talk about this, and this, but ultimately, I would rather see where they take it. And
Yeah.
because they're almost always way more creative and interesting than what I would, plus I'm capturing their interest, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
It is always the easiest place to be, is to start from their interests.
yeah.
And people always are, you know, people outside of homeschooling or early in homeschooling will ask about the gaps. And I think, yeah, everyone's education has a gap.
Hmm.
And literally everybody's, because none of us are God or Google. So we all don't know everything. But that really isn't the point of the education, anyways. But when we follow down our kids' interests, we can take that down. You know, if we really think that they need to learn cursive, which I think about half the population thinks that we should still learn it and the other half doesn't. And so if we think they need to learn cursive, we could pull out a passage from their favorite book and, you know, learn to write that or start with their name. Or
Mm.
if we want to do math, I can almost guarantee you can find math in pretty much every piece of literature somehow, some way. You know,
Hmm.
there's very interesting ways to approach learning coming from a book that maybe they're interested in, or maybe even Minecraft. You know, there's so many different ways.
Oh, for sure. Card games, board,
Yeah,
yeah, everywhere, right? You have to. It's just a matter of being aware without being, hyper vigilant about it. It's just it's so casual, right? It's not like, oh, a learning opportunity. Let's rush over there, learn a
yeah,
thing. It's not like that. It's just part and parcel of your day. We're reading together. We're talking about the book. We're talking about characters. We're talking about whatever. And so, we just don't need to be wound up about it, right? We just need
right.
to raise our own awareness of how we approach things, and let life unfold.
And play with it. I think there's so much research coming out right now about play
Mm-hmm.
and how if you can facilitate that, then you're actually enabling the brain to fully engage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the goal. But, you know, just like you're saying, creating learning opportunities for, say, a 5, 6 year old, something like that. Um, we layer on a lot of expectation on what a child's education is supposed to look like because we're comparing it to something that we believe is the
Yeah,
accurate way to do it.
yeah, exactly. And you know, the job of the 5 or 6 year old is just wonder and play, right? And
Yeah.
they're just, everything they do is absorbed through play. So even if you're, say you're reading Charlotte's Web to them, you're doing a math lesson with them, whatever, you know, and then you'll see them sorting shells or sorting their Legos into, you know, different types or whatever, and you think, okay, there it is, right? They're just doing math, right? So all we're doing is lighting a little spark.
And creating a rich learning environment. You talk
Mm-hmm.
about creating a rich learning environment for our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, partly a temporal environment, you know, having lots of books around, maps, atlases, globes, timelines, you know, creating a rich learning environment, you know, in what we have in our stuff, right? But also creating an environment in the discussion and accessibility of things, you know, like what I've never done a geography program with my kids. Why would I do that? Because every time we look up where it is.
Yeah.
So they learn to use an app by the fact that I go, okay, well, you flip to the back, you look up the town we're looking for, and then here's the coordinates, and you just find the latitude and longitude of this place, and there it is, right? So you do that, it knows how to do it, right? It's not like you do geography with them, right? And so, yeah, there's just creating a rich attitude, well, is equally as important as creating a rich, you know, library or, you know, visual environment, timelines and maps, right? Talking about things and using those things, right?
One of the most fun actual resources that I've had is something that you also mentioned, a timeline, or is it timeline or time chart history of the world?
Yeah.
The one that I have can stretch down like 20 feet of my hallway. Maybe it's not 20 feet. Maybe it's like 10.
The people, if I move you, can I go show the people ours? Because they can see this, right? So
yeah.
I'll show you it. Like when we bought this house, I was like, oh, perfect. My timeline can go right here. Because I had always had to split it up because the walls were too short. But when we got this place, so I'm just going to turn this on. If I go like this, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the timeline.
Yes. That might be
it's called the time chart of world history.
Yep.
And then we, like the things that we study, you know, specifically we put up here as we're learning, you know, we just make a note to ourselves, right? And so that's called the time chart of world history, and it's in my resource post that I have up on my blog. So but yeah, so important, right? We use that thing all the time, and it's not always when we're homeschooling per se, right? But we're always homeschooling, you know, so it's not like, okay, children, go look up things on the timeline. It's just like, oh man, did you know that this guy lived at the same time as this guy? Wow, or these two things are happening at the same time?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's so good for us to be doing that, right?
That I just found, that's fascinating for myself. I didn't have an interest in history before I homeschooled. And
right.
I find it really interesting. I don't know if it's that we're trying to fill our own gaps as homeschool parents, but a lot of homeschool parents love engaging in history. And that timeline was so intriguing for me, because the things that you're like, wait, this was at the same time as that? And then trying to conceptualize, okay, I think of that as a distinct time in history.
Yeah.
Overlap. It's very interesting to learn that.
Yeah, because the streams in it are, you can compare, you know, what was going on in, you know, the eastern part of the world compared to, you know, Western Europe or whatever, or in the New World, you know, what things were going on at the same time is very cool. I also like to have a really simple timeline. I should have shown you that when I was in there. That just shows the big blocks of history. This is ancient civilizations. This is Western civilization. This is, you know, New World. I like to have really simple timelines, which is something easy to make yourself. You know, just simple blocks of history, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a site for Charlotte Mason that has a book of centuries that you can actually download. And
okay, nice.
You can actually write in different historical moments.
Right.
And you know, if that's something that you want to do, because I definitely did more traditional stuff in the beginning of homeschool years.
Yeah.
Also, just reading is also useful. But you know, you talked originally right in the beginning about curriculum, how do you use curriculum besides, you know, stacking bookshelves and collecting stuff over the course of years, which it seems I've done. But besides just collecting stuff and spending a lot of money on stuff you may or may not use,
Yeah.
a lot of money, what do you suggest? How do you actually use curriculum?
Well, I think it depends at what age, because at some point kids become independent and they're able. And so first of all, let's just talk about the younger years and kind of move up. So with younger kids, the main thing you have to remember is curriculum should never own you, right? That you should be able to pick and choose from the curriculum what is appropriate for the child. So if you use curriculum, don't let it own you.
Yeah.
You know, rip pages out, just ask them to do this page or this page. Don't frustrate them by having them do stuff they already know, and don't frustrate them by having them do stuff they're not ready for, right? So you be sensitive to that. So again, sitting beside them, you know, for the 5-10 minutes, it's just so much more efficient than saying, okay, do those 5 pages of the workbook, and then come back to me when they're done.
Yeah.
You know, some days it might take them 5 minutes because they know all the stuff. Some days they might be sitting there after an hour thinking, well, I don't know how to do this. And then they end up just feeling stupid, right? And then you feel all stressed out because they're not, you know, fitting the workbook, right? It's so important to remember that ultimately the child that the workbook is based on is an archetype child, right? It's not a real child.
Nobody's child.
No, it's nobody's child. And so it's just somebody's best guess on how a child might move along in this particular subject area and the things that you might want to cover.
Right.
So say in a math book, they're going to cover the different areas of math. They're going to cover, you know, arithmetic and shapes and order and sorting and that sort of thing. And they're going to deal with that at a certain level. Math, you know, you basically are looking at the same things every year, just more complex way, right? So maybe your child completely understands fractions, but hasn't got a clue about dimensional figures, right? They just don't get it. Their brain's not there yet. So if that's presented to them in the same book, and you're thinking, well, this book is designed for a 9-year-old, so they should get dimensional figures if they get fractions. That doesn't even make sense. Well, actually, you know, they don't really have anything to do with each other. So if they're just, all you need to say is, you know what, we're going to come back to that. That's kind of a tricky thing to think about, but we'll come back to that. And then you revisit it 2 months later, 2 years later, whatever. You know, eventually they're going to get it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry about it if they're not. So we have to remember that it's the child we're teaching, not the workbook, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Really important.
Yeah. I have been in awe, actually, of how many times I repeated times tables with kids and was like, what happened? Like, it just disappeared. But I've also learned that just because they learned it now doesn't mean it's locked in there. They do need to eventually come back to it. And so the goal of just, especially with math, when we look at it as whatever is in the workbook, you need to know. If that's the goal, it's not necessarily actually sinking into your brain in understanding math concepts or design or patterns, or, you know, the actual concept might not be learned. And sometimes we need to repeat it in different scenarios in different places. But especially for me to learn that kids don't learn in a linear way. It's not just here's A plus B plus C plus D plus E until you're done the alphabet. They're not computers. You can't just put stuff in and get stuff out. And they will take a little bit in and maybe they'll spit it out, but maybe they won't. Maybe you'll need to come back to it, just like you said. And knowing that helps me be patient. I wish I knew that in the beginning.
I know. Yeah, it's a funny thing, eh? The things we wish we'd known.
So
but also, you know, I wish there was a resource. Maybe there is. I'll have to try and find this. But I wish there was a resource that said, here are all the math skills your children will be doing. So you make sure you hit every one of them each year, but you don't worry about where they're at with them. Like, you know, so every year be sure to cover arithmetic, be sure to cover shapes, be sure to cover fractions, be sure to cover whatever, you know, and just so that we think, oh, okay, right, I can cover all those things, and just whatever they are able to do, they can do. You know what I mean? It would be a handy chart or something for us to have, right?
instead of learning outcomes that the province provides us or whatever state we're in. Because
Yeah.
when like really even teachers don't go by that. Just like you said in your workshop, teachers will go into a workbook and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to skip this part. So
Yeah.
we don't, as homeschool moms, have to do everything in that either. But
No.
when we, you know, I know that you and I have, we're both registered homeschoolers in our province, which really means that we're determining our academic program for our child. And not everybody's in that same scenario. And so they're trying to appease, appease or engage a facilitator, some sort of homeschool facilitator outside of their home to match the state or province that they're in. And if you were to look at the learning outcomes that the state or the province expects from the kids, you would be like, oh, what are we supposed to do with the kids? And can you really do all this stuff within the first, you know, that year? And the answer usually is no, it's not. And also, does it matter anyway, would be the bigger question.
Yeah.
Should that really be the goal of how we approach their education? So just don't read those. I guess that would probably be, don't go there.
Well, and also they're in school speak, you know, and so, you know, for somebody who's not familiar with that language, it's like, I don't even know what they're talking about here. And it would be so frustrating, I think, for a parent new to the game to look at the sort of teacher speak and the outcomes as they're laid out in that language. You know, a really good teacher can, you know, a homeschool, what do they call them? Contact teacher would be, you know, should be well versed in, oh, okay, well, all that means is this, right? Well, all that means is this, right? Don't worry about it. You're already doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you're talking about if there was only a book of the things that they could be learning this year, I'm like, I have read that book. It's called the Provincial Learning Outcomes in British Columbia, and it scared the socks off me.
Right. Yeah.
But that's a schooled approach to doing it. So yeah, you're really just following your child's natural skills, or maybe not their natural skills, but you're following your child's natural abilities as you're trying to include different skills. And I know for myself, in my truly unschooling years, I was surprised to discover that we would include all sorts of things from the natural world that were part of the curriculum in the province. And I wasn't trying. It just came up because they were curious.
Exactly. Yeah. And we can, you know, flog the curiousness out of them. That's one option, right? You know, and getting bogged down with checklists and whatnot, of course, that's one way to do that. But, you know, I'm going to get back to the topic of the idea of using curriculum, because as kids get older, that, of course, changes. And for my kids, I basically let them choose curriculum as they were ready for it. So it was really came from them. You know, okay, I'd like to do kind of a science book this year. I'd like to do like a high school science program. So we would talk about the different things available to them. But it was, you know, pretty led from them. I mean, of course, I was there for guidance or for direction or whatever. But I would say, okay, here's the ones we already own. If you find out about a science resource that sounds a lot better, you know, you could look into other things as well. So, you know, let's talk about how that's going to look, or maybe you take a couple of online courses or whatever. So, but by that time, that's when they're really independent learners, right? So except for doing things like study guides, this is why the focus on creating a literate family is so important, right? And literacy is so important, because literacy means you can take anything and read it and learn it, right? And so when we've created a really literate environment for our kids, they can teach themselves anything. Right? They can follow instructions. They can read a thing, even a complex thing. They could pick up a book and think, oh, okay, well, if I don't understand this word or this phrase, I can just go look that up. That's literacy. You know, they want to be a plumber. They could get the plumbing manual and they would read it and understand it, right? So to be really literate really matters. So by the time they're choosing their own, science program or math program, or however they'll look for them, history program, they are completely independent in that, right? And sometimes I'll help them with a study guide or something like that. But in terms of the actual learning, they're independent, right?
I actually really like how you.
Sorry.
I like how you
address the independence we want, right? Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. That's
Well,
the
we
kind of
kind of
independence
expect
we
this
want.
independence. Sorry?
Sorry. We want that independence because why?
Because that's how they grow as a person, once they grab it themselves and go forward themselves with it, right? But we expect it when they're much younger, you
Yes.
know, but it's really in those years that you want to. And so it's the kid who's been poked and prodded along, like, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing, who ends up disliking learning. And then
Yeah.
when it's time to get into high school, you're still poking and prodding them,
Yeah.
right? There shouldn't be any poking and prodding in high school. You should be well beyond that, right?
That is actually the confounding thing. Trying to explain to people that listen, you actually, it's different when they're in that age because there's a different level of it's just a different kind of parenting than when they're
Yeah.
younger, and it isn't less parenting, that's for sure, but it's a different kind. And yet how they approach their academics, if you haven't been force feeding them the entire time and, like you said, turning them off from learning or flogging them with learning, then they actually start to discover who they are, what they're about, how they want to approach their life, and they
Yeah.
go to it really independently. So it's actually, I find, easier than more difficult. And I don't really think actually homeschooling is difficult at all. It's just about framing how you're seeing what's happening in front of you and
Yeah.
understanding that you mostly need to get out of the way.
Yeah, we're facilitators. That's all.
Yeah.
We give direction. We provide resources. You know, we you know, answer their questions the best we can. You know,
Yes.
but we're facilitators, and they will educate themselves, right? But they need some guidance to do that. They need some structure to do that, right?
Especially when you're showing them when they're younger, like you're
Yeah,
talking.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is exciting because then it makes it more fun.
exactly.
Somebody on your workshop had asked, like, what is the age that you start to develop that independent thing, or how do you
Right.
actually, how do you facilitate that?
Oh, independence? I don't know. I find it that it just kind of comes from them. Like at some point, say for example, we're doing math. You know, we're
Yeah.
going along doing math, and I'm kind of sitting with them or whatever. And at some point, I'm just sitting there, and they're doing the math, but I'm there in case they have a question. I don't want them to be frustrated, and it's short, so it's okay for me to be
Mhm.
sitting there. And
Yeah.
at some point, I say, "Do you feel like you could do this on your own?"
Yeah.
And they say yep or no. It's usually yep, you know, when I'm, you know, I'm reading them, right? And so then I'll say, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to get up. I'm not going to start work with anybody else right now. I'm just going to get up and tidy up the kitchen or whatever. I'm right here, so if you need me, you call me. So that's the only thing is, those whatever I decide I'm doing at that independence level, I go to them immediately. Okay, I'm struggling with this, I don't understand what this means, right? Okay, let's work through that. Okay, but I make myself completely available. My mind is still, okay, I am supporting this person as they're learning. So maybe that happens for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or an entire school year, that I'm just kind of make myself available, but they don't actually need me very often, right?
Right.
And so when that happens, then I think, okay, you're independent. Now, they know if they, the next year, if they start on a program and they are working away at it and they're doing just fine, and, you know, I'm marking their tests or their self-marking or whatever, that, that if they get stuck somewhere, that they can turn to me as, you know what, I'm really, really not understanding this math. So what do I do now? Right? I'll say, okay, well, I can try and work through it with you, or we can go look up a couple of videos on Khan Academy and see if we can get over this bump, or is this just maybe too advanced, or let's problem solve. But usually at that point of independence, they don't really have any problems anymore. So it's very much it's a dance, right? So I'm gonna, you know, do you feel like you could do this on your own? Yep. Okay. I'm right here if you need me, right? And at some point, I don't need to be there anymore. You know, it's a bit like if you, I'm going to use hygiene because I think it's just a good analogy. You know, when your kids are okay, let's use manners. When your kids are small and they're going over to visit a friend's house for the first time, they're 6 years old or whatever. Don't forget, if you want something, you need to go in so-and-so's fridge or cupboard. You know, you have to ask Mrs. So-and-so for her, you know, if you could have a drink of water or whatever. Use your manners. Be sure to say please and thank you. We give them this little coaching, right? We coach them. And then they get a little older and we don't coach them so much, and we'll say, you know, don't forget your manners, right? And you know, and then we hear back, we get some feedback from Mrs. So-and-so, oh, you're sounds so polite when he comes over. It's really nice to see that. And we think, oh, yay, it actually worked. And then at some point, you don't need to tell them anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe they're 11, maybe they're 16, but you don't need to tell them anymore, right? And And it's just that sort of slow letting go. You good with this? Yeah, I'm good with this. You know, how's that math book? Or maybe you check in twice a year, you know, when they're 16. How's that math book working out? Yeah, I like it. It's great. It's great. All right, there's a couple chapters I skipped because I didn't really understand them. So I'm going to go back to them at the end of the year. Right? So that independence is just so gradual and so self-oriented, right? They've decided they're ready for me to not be there, right?
Yes, that is. And I've seen that happen with all of my kids, the ones that started really independent and the ones that didn't. And they all grew into that independence.
Yeah.
Tell me how, first of all, I just want to ask you, so should we homeschool like a traditional school day from 8 o'clock to 3:30?
No.
Okay.
No, because we're also running a household. But
I have, by the way, I have done that.
Yeah, I know people who have desks, you know, I mean, there's lots of different ways. Me personally, no, I don't think you should do that. I don't think it should take that long because of the nature of homeschooling is very one-on-one, right? Our class size is very small and we have a house to run and we're dealing with different ages. So, you know, it's not like we have 30, 16-year-olds that we're trying to impart, you know, the history of the Roman Empire to, right? It's different than that. It's more individualized. You know, that said, we never stop homeschooling. There's always dialogue. There's always conversation. There's always looking something up. There's always just an ongoing thing. But our structured sort of sit down time or time together that, you know, for my family, that's been kind of, you know, from breakfast time to lunchtime. And that's all. Sometimes the high schoolers are doing things, you know, they're doing their science in the afternoon or whatever. It's definitely going to take them longer. But a lot of what they're doing is reading too, right? So again, in the podcast that comes out on Saturday, this is another thing we address is like, how do you make that happen? How do you make school happen from, you know, 8 to 12 or 9 to 12, whatever. So we kind of delve into that a little more if anyone's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. That is an excellent resource. A question about motivation. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, pop them into the comment section. But a question about motivation. When people say, my kid is just not motivated, how do I get them motivated? What would be your first thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the age of the child, I mean, I think that has to start with a conversation, right? So you have a 9-year-old and you say, you know, what is it that's bothering you about your schoolwork? You know, well, it's taking too long. Well, it's too boring. Well, it's too hard. Well, it's too, okay. All right. So what would it look like for you then if we did things differently?
Yeah.
Right. What if I said, okay, let's scrap all of what we're doing here and do something different? Or is there any parts of your schoolwork that you like doing? What do you like doing? Right. And they might say nothing. Or they might say, well, I like my science book. Right. Okay. Well, let's start there. So we don't need to change anything with science, but maybe we need to change some things.
Right.
You know, often it's boys that will come up with those phrases. You know, they're harder to motivate, and I think that we have to learn how to work with the boys differently. It's not always boys, but it's often, you know, oh, I don't want to do my work. I want to sit and stare at the computer all day long or whatever. Okay. What can we do? Here's the things that I think are important to learn. What do you think is important to learn? Right. Let's talk about that. You know, one day you're going to want a job. One day you're going to, you know, maybe you're going to want to go to university. Maybe you're going to want to trade. So, you know, there's some skills you're going to need to be an adult, right? I want to help you get there, but I don't want it to be a place where we fight all the time.
Right.
So how can we make that work? And I think that, first of all, I think it takes a lot of humility for a parent to just say, you know what, I might need to trash everything I do and completely look at school education in a different way.
Right.
But I also might need to bring my child into that conversation is, you know what, I think maybe we've been approaching this in a way that's really made learning not joyful for you or not fun. And maybe they say, you know, I don't care if it's fun or joyful, I just want it to be short. Okay, I can work with that. I can work with that. You know, so let's do it. Let's look at this a bit differently and see what options we have. You know, and there's been, with the internet, of course, there's piles of options out there, but there's book learning, there's online classes, there's recorded classes, there's interactive with the parent, just doing a thing, there's unschooling, there's all kinds of options. So what could that look like in our family? So I think it just starts with a conversation. You know, I'm concerned. And again, people often go through phases boys in particular go through a phase where they're not motivated. You know, we think of girls going through the hormonal stuff. I think boys really go through that as well, 12, 13, 14, and they can become sullen and uncooperative. And sometimes we just need to give them their space. And you know, a conversation, listen, I'll just let you, if you just want to work in your room, that's okay with me. You know, I think it'd be good for us to finish this book, or I'd like you to take this course. Let's talk about what works for you. And just, you know, back off a little bit.
You know what? This year is my first year that I'll be homeschooling just one child, and he is a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy. So interesting for me to hear that from you. And of course, I've homeschooled four kids, 3 kids, 2 kids, and now it'll be 1. And you know, do you have any words of advice this year, or to, because we both have had many?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we, last year was my first year of homeschooling 1. And in fact, everybody was out of the house. The daughters are married. The boys were all at college and university. And it was just Lydia and I. And we were sad, you know, we were a little bit sad. But there was also some real silver linings in that too. Like, that we could do whatever we wanted, whatever anybody else's opinion didn't matter, you know. So we just got to just say, okay, what do we really want to do, you and me, for these next couple of years? And we kind of mapped out our couple of years, like what this is going to look like. You know, Lydia her social needs aren't really high. I don't know what your son's like, but I think that when it's the last kid at home, if they're very social, we need to find some outlets for that. It has not really been a problem, you know, for her, because she loves to just sort of do her own thing and that sort of thing. But if your kids, I've seen a lot of times people homeschooling and the last kid at home actually ends up going to high school, which, you know, I mean, that in and of itself isn't a bad thing. You know, there's some conversation. If you feel really reactive about that, you need to express those concerns and, you know, here's what I'm worried about. Or could we do a hybrid system where you do 2 days a week at the school and the rest of the time with me, or whatever? You know, it all starts with conversation, right?
I can certainly understand. You know, obviously, if you have 13 kids at home, you'll feel really tapped. I know a homeschool family that does have 13 kids. And she was one of the most patient, peaceful parents I've ever seen. I was in awe. But, you know, I can also understand how it'd also be quite exhausting having, you know, just one child at home if their social demand or their needs are high, or if they like talking a lot, or, you know, I've had that question asked many times and I've never actually been there before. So I get to experience it this year along with you and with other people that are also having their last child at home. But, you know, I think we could continue talking to infinity and beyond. And we should.
I was thinking that too,
I think we should continue this conversation for sure. But as a final takeaway for homeschool moms that are planning their upcoming homeschool years, what would you suggest to them?
If your kids are young, I would suggest starting off not using curriculum. Start off, read Ruth Beechick's The 3 R's, simple little book, lovely book, and will help you to understand where education is everywhere you turn. And you will save so much money by reading that book, right? It's just phenomenal. A lovely book. So if your kids are sort of, you know, grade 3s, 4, younger than that, I would suggest starting there. Just allow yourself to be a homeschooler and decide what it is you want as your life is unfolding, rather than deciding what it is you want based on going to a conference and seeing all the, you know, shiny things. And there's a great place for curriculum, but find out who you are first, find out what you love first. And so I would say start there, and don't put any pressure on yourself. You know, just enjoy this journey, because they're not little for very long.
That is so true. Although that's hard to tell families that when they have little ones, because I remember thinking, I'm so tired. It's gonna last forever, and it doesn't.
I know.
So and the last 3 thoughts or 3 questions I had for you were really a way to, you know, finish off our conversation in a fun way. So tell me, what is a memory that you've made this week with either your kids or your grandkids?
Oh, that's a great question. So probably my grandkids, 3 of my grandbabies live on our property. So they have a cottage that we rent to them on our property. And they just got a puppy this week. So it's been really neat, because I think I'm not really a dog person, but I think dogs, we've had dogs over the years because we can see that that's really important for kids.
Yeah.
And to just see their eyes light up, you know,
Yeah.
do you want to hold my puppy, you know, and
Yeah.
so that's been really fun to just sort of be part of that with them and see the excitement and them, you know, hear them squealing as they're running around the yard, puppy chasing their heels and that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's been a really fun memory for this week, and it reminds me too, of course, when my kids had puppies.
Do you know what, that second question that I had for you is a multiple choice question, because I know that you're on a homestead as well and you've looked after animals. And I also heard you say that you wanted to have a horse when you were a child, but your parents said you had to choose one extracurricular activity. So you didn't learn how, or at least at that time, you didn't do horsemanship.
No,
But
I did. I gave up dance to do
you did
horses.
give up dance.
Yeah.
Okay. So ironically, like I said earlier, the iPad is propped up on a book about goats, homesteading, gardens, and chickens, and that's purely coincidence. But I was going to ask you what your favorite animal is to look after.
Um, well, I would say probably a horse. If we, over the years, like horses and cats are the two animals that I really like. We don't really raise animals. My son-in-law has pigs on our property and they're doing honeybees, which is really cool. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it myself. Over the years, we've had chickens and goats and different things. But I think that a couple of my kids were into horses at the time, you know, back in the day and just recently. So we've been out of the horse business for about 2 years. And I really, really loved that. Not for I know that what it did for me as a kid was allowed me an opportunity to build incredible self-confidence, to be able to handle this great big 1,000-pound animal is quite a big deal for a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that that's been a really cool thing. My kids have all taken riding lessons at one time or another,
Yeah, me too.
and some of them sort of, you know, caught more than others. And they ended up, you know, two of them ended up with their own pony. And just the growth of that, the growth of them as a person was just incredible to watch, right? So yeah, so I really loved that. And horses are just a nice animal, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
absolutely large. I'm in my neighborhood. We have horses as well. I grew up with horses around us in the neighborhood, and they're a whole different kind of animal. You really have to be able to be empathic and connect with them, almost like a very stubborn child, depending on the personality of the human. But it's a beautiful skill to have.
It is, yeah. I always imagined that one day I would actually ride myself as I got older and various other things. But I think, you know, sometimes we just have to go with things. Like somehow that's just gone away now that I don't have kids interested in horses. It's like, no, there's other stuff I want to do. And it's a huge time commitment, right? Animals in general are a huge time commitment. So, you know, we've had them off and on over the years, but yeah.
So tell me what your vision is for your next homeschool year.
Wow. Okay. So Lydia and I sort of mapped out this homeschool, you know, her last 3 years, which we completed the first one last year, sort of so ancient cultures this year, classical Greece and Rome, and then more modern history the following year. And sort of we're going to kind of go through this cycle, which is I've always gone kind of loosely through a cycle, but more interest-based. But we sort of mapped out these 3 years so that we could really get a handle on it. I did an interview with Joseph Pierce a few weeks ago on Shakespeare, and I really want to do his, even though we've studied Romeo and Juliet before, we studied Shakespeare before, I try and do one Shakespeare a year. But he just recommended these resources that we're super jazzed about, so we also want to do that. But, you know, in terms of field trips, I really would like to go back to Europe as soon as I can.
Yeah.
So that would be, you know, so we're talking about that, but we're trying not to get our hopes up just in case that doesn't happen. So, but it would be cool. We'd like to go back with myself and Albert and just Lydia and just see, you know, do kind of the things that we like to do, museums and things like that. So
yeah, me too. I'll come. No problem.
Yeah.
I'll babysit.
Yeah.
You said something about let's see, revisiting your purpose every day. And that's something similar to what I say as well, about like discovering what your vision words are for your homeschool and just going back to it even momentarily in the morning, maybe with a journal, and just saying, what am I really here for? What am I doing this for? And I think, just like you said, coming up with a vision, coming up with a plan, and revisiting it every day is the way that you can help move towards the thing that you're really intending to do in your homeschool.
Yeah. On my website, I have some resources like little freebie printouts and stuff like homeschool planners and things like that.
Yeah.
Planning pages and kind of how to use them. But one of them is like kind of a 1 week planner. So you put the pages together and you can fold them out so you can see your week at a glance, and then you can just put point form. But I have little reminders in there of, don't forget to snuggle. It's the idea being that, to remind parents of what this is all about, right? So those are something people can download if they want to print them.
It has been such a pleasure chatting with you, and
you too.
Do this conversation all day long. And
I know. Well, and we have to get together and do something in person as soon as our life is all back to normal, whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means, whenever that means.
I know.
I thought it was supposed to be last March or April or something. Anyway.
I know. Okay, well, take care, and we'll talk soon.
So
Okay.
tell me, where do we find you online? Your resources?
Online. So my podcast is makejoynormal.buzzsprout.com.
Okay.
But it's on all the podcast carriers, there's 25 different podcast carriers. It's on all of those. So Make Joy Normal. I also have another little podcast that I do for Catholic moms, although I think it's not necessarily all Catholic moms, called Martha, Distracted by Many Things. It was just kind of 5 or 10 minutes, in the morning, to encouragement or whatever. I do that 2, 3, 4 times a week. But it's really short, little aspirations. And then my website, where my blog and anything I do, all my resources and whatnot, is just www.bonnieland.com.
Well, Bonnie, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for joining me today and sharing many pearls of wisdom. But I encourage everybody to go check out your workshops on your podcast, Make Joy Normal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Take care.
Bye, everybody.